Welcome back to Covert Truths, where the quietest voices often carry the deepest truths. Here, we don't chase noise. We uncover the moments the world overlooks, the soft rebellions, the silent strength, and the dignity that refuses to be erased. What happens when a teenage girl is dragged out of line at the airport, not for what she did, but for who they think she isn't? What if the man who shows up to defend her is John Wick? Before we begin this powerful story, don't forget to share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you more stories that matter. The morning light at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport had a gentleness to it, one of those warm, filtered beams that slipped through the tall windows and settled on the tiled floor like an invitation to breathe a little slower. Outside, planes coasted quietly against a sky the color of milky porcelain, not yet disturbed by the Texas sun. Inside, people moved with a practiced sense of urgency, the tug of rolling suitcases, the buzz of quiet conversations, the shuffle of shoes on linoleum. It was the kind of morning where nothing felt particularly urgent, but everything still had to happen on time. Amara stood in line with her boarding pass already in hand. She held it the way one might hold a note from someone they trusted lightly, carefully, with an unspoken hope that it would carry her forward without trouble. She was 17, though her posture often made her seem older. Her hoodie, a soft charcoal gray, was zipped up to her collarbone. A canvas backpack hung from her shoulders, slightly worn at the seams, a patch of peeling vinyl on the side from years of tournaments and training camps. She didn't look out of place to herself, but she had learned that sometimes it didn't matter what she saw. When it was her turn, she stepped forward with the kind of grace that isn't taught in schools. Shelby, the woman behind the counter, glanced up with a tired flick of the eyes, then paused. A beat too long, her name tag read Shelby Armstrong. Her lipstick was faintly smudged at the corner. Her nails were painted a shade of pink that might have once matched the spring flowers on her apron, but had dulled with time. Shelby looked Amara over. Not in the way you look at someone to help them, in the way you look at someone to confirm what you've already decided. Is this ticket yours, sweetheart? Or did someone else drop it on the floor? The question came out smooth, almost lazy, but there was a slight edge in the way she drew out sweetheart, as if daring Amara to misunderstand it as kindness. Amara handed over her boarding pass and ID without comment, her face calm, her shoulders set. Shelby took the ID, flipping it in her fingers like she was expecting it to crumble under her gaze. Amara Clark, she read aloud. Business class, huh? There was no real question there. Just a tone, dry and curled at the edges. Yes, ma'am, Amara said. Her voice didn't rise or falter. It was the voice of someone who had learned that calmness often disarmed suspicion, but not always. Shelby gave a small, breathy laugh that never reached her eyes. Let me guess, she said, drawing out the words like she was threading them slowly through a needle. Going to some kind of sports thing? Maybe karate camp? Martial arts training seminar, Amara replied. In Chicago? Shelby leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Well, got some confidence, don't you? There was something deliberate in the way she said it, like confidence was a crime that needed verifying. Then she smirked, glanced down again at the ID. And let me guess again, Daddy paid for all this? What is he, John Wick or something? There was laughter behind her eyes before she even finished the sentence. Amara didn't blink. Her fingers tightened just slightly around the strap of her backpack. He is, she said. The laugh that escaped Shelby then was louder, sharper, the kind that made nearby travelers glance over, unsure whether to be amused or uncomfortable. Oh, honey, Shelby said, waving the ID like it were part of the joke. You don't seriously expect me to believe that? She laughed again, this time looking around to see if anyone else was in on it. A man 2 spots behind Amara shifted his weight from one foot to the other. A woman scrolled through her phone without looking up. The world moved on, as it often does, around small acts of dismissal. Amara said nothing. Her jaw was still, her breath steady. But inside her chest, something was beginning to ache. Not in a sharp way, but like a quiet bruise pressed too many times. Shelby leaned in, lowered her voice just a touch. "Look," she said, now with mock sympathy. "I've seen your type. Smart girl, looks calm. Polite, got all the right answers, but you don't fit, sweetie. Not here." She tapped the desk with one manicured nail, then, without breaking eye contact, slid her hand beneath the counter and pressed a small black button. Amara didn't react. She just watched Shelby pull back her arm and return her ID, all in one smooth motion as if nothing had happened at all. But something had. From the corner of her eye, Amara saw two uniformed men begin moving toward her. Security, moving fast, but not running. Like they already knew what they were about to do? The terminal remained filled with light, with the hum of movement and faraway announcements. But for Amara, the air felt thicker. Her fingers curled gently behind her back, not in fear, but in preparation for what, she wasn't yet sure. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said. The words weren't defensive, just offered like a stone placed on the ground. "Something steady?" Shelby gave a tight, theatrical shrug. "We'll let the officers decide that." One of the guards stepped up beside her. His badge read Officer Lindell. He was tall, pale, with a stiff upper lip and an expression that looked carved, not worn. "Ma'am," he said, "we need you to step aside for a few questions." Amara nodded once. She picked up her backpack, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and moved without protest. Not because she agreed, but because she had learned the cost of resisting without witness. As she walked, the light followed her, casting a long shadow behind her feet, soft, quiet, nearly invisible. But it was there, and even then, she knew. This was no longer just about a ticket. It was about being seen and being believed. It was about how a name like hers could be met with a smirk. It was about how truth could sit in your hands, warm and steady, and still not be enough. The hallway where they led her was quieter, cooler. A ceiling fan hummed above like a tired breath. She followed without speaking, her head high but heart heavy. And somewhere inside her, something began to stir. Not anger, not yet. But something quieter, something older, something like resolve. And as the door closed behind her, with the echo of footsteps just beginning to grow louder, Amara thought about her father's voice, how steady it always sounded on the other end of the phone, like an anchor dropped in deep water. She wished she could hear it now. The air smelled faintly of metal and carpet cleaner. And for a moment, all she could do was stand still and wait. Wait for whatever the world had decided she looked like that morning. Wait for whatever it would take to remind them of who she really was. The space around her changed before she could name the feeling. It wasn't sudden, just slow enough to feel unreal. The two security officers came from either side like they were walking into a scene they'd played out 100 times. No one raised a voice, no alarm blared. It was all done under the pretense of protocol, quiet, orderly, rehearsed. "Ma'am, step away from the counter." The taller one spoke with the flatness of a man used to being obeyed. No kindness, no cruelty, just the sound of a door closing behind you. Amara turned her head slightly, startled not by the command, but by the fact that it was already being acted upon. One officer was reaching for her arm, the other for the strap of her backpack. There was no pause for explanation, no room for protest. She had already become something other than a girl. She tried, her voice catching in her throat, the first ripple of confusion showing. "I can explain." But her words floated above them like the hum of the airport ceiling lights, acknowledged by no one. The officer to her left tugged the backpack from her shoulder, hard enough that her body lurched. The other turned her gently but firmly by the arm, guiding her a few steps to the side, not violently. but with the unmistakable suggestion that resistance would be remembered, written down, punished. She wasn't a passenger now. She was a question to be answered, a disruption to be neutralized. "Please," she said again, quieter now, "just be careful." They didn't respond. Behind the counter, Shelby stood with her arms folded across her chest, watching with a kind of satisfied detachment, like someone who had just confirmed a suspicion and was now watching it unfold, not with malice, but with a self-satisfied nod to the order of things. One of the guards laid Amara's backpack flat on the inspection table. The zipper was dragged open in one smooth, practiced motion. Items spilled out in small, harmless waves: her notebook, a rolled-up t-shirt, travel-sized toiletries, a bundle of neatly wrapped wrist wraps. A protein bar bounced once, then rolled off the edge of the table, and then came the silence. A silence that didn't belong in an airport. A silence that made room for the sound that followed, a soft clink, then a sharper crack. A ceramic cup, small and white, edged with a blue glaze, had slipped from the depths of the backpack. It hit the floor once, then again, then shattered. Amara's breath stopped. Her body didn't move, but inside, something pulled tight, like the air had folded around her chest and forgotten how to let go. The officer who had opened the bag stepped back, almost carelessly. "Oh," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "That's broken." She dropped to her knees, not out of drama, not from weakness, but the way one does when something too fragile to replace lies scattered in too many pieces. Her hands reached forward on instinct, not to pick it up, but to gather it, to contain the mess, to keep it from being touched by anyone else. It had been her father's, not the one waiting on the other end of a phone line with a voice like steady water. The one before that. The man who had died when she was still too young to understand what it meant for someone to stop coming back. The cup had been his, one of the few things her birth mother had kept. It was cracked when she received it, already imperfect. But it had survived moves, years, miles, until now. Amara stared down at the shards, the blue pattern still visible in places, like veins running across broken skin. Her fingers hovered above the pieces. She didn't cry. Not yet, but her throat felt tight, her eyes dry and wide. Behind her, a phone camera clicked. Someone had started filming. A man to her right shifted uncomfortably, then quickly looked away. No one stepped in. The other guard opened the front flap of her backpack and dumped the contents: another shirt, her journal, loose pens. And at the very end, tucked deep in the corner, a soft pink bra fell out. It landed near the edge of the table, slightly crumpled, shamefully ordinary. Someone laughed, a short, sharp sound. She didn't look up. She reached forward and scooped it back into her palm, cradling it close like it needed shielding. That was when Shelby's voice cut through the air again, louder than necessary. "Wait a second," she said, leaning slightly over the counter. "Didn't you say your dad was John Wick?" Her tone was bright with false innocence. Amara didn't answer. Shelby stepped closer, arms still crossed. Her voice took on the warmth of something sour. "Because just a minute ago, you were saying your dad was some action movie legend. And now you're over here crying about a coffee mug. Which is it, sweetheart? You got two dads or just a messy story?" It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like the mug, like the pink bra, like the quiet way Amara had tried to hold herself together, none of it was real. None of it mattered. Not to someone like Shelby, who lived in a world where people came in boxes and stayed in them. Something stirred. Not the kind of rage that burns. The kind that rises slowly, like heat from the pavement, until you don't notice you're sweating. Amara stood. Her legs moved stiffly, knees still heavy from kneeling. Her hands were clenched now, not in fists, but in a careful holding of the mug shards, wrapped loosely in the sleeve of her hoodie. She looked at Shelby. And for the first time that morning, she let herself feel seen, not as a mistake, but as something more solid. She didn't say a word, but her silence wasn't soft anymore. It had shape, and inside it there was a storm. As the crowd shifted, some murmuring, some pretending not to notice, Amara stood perfectly still beside her broken belongings. She breathed in through her nose, slow and steady, until the shaking in her hands lessened. She was not okay. But she wasn't done either. Outside the window, a plane taxied slowly across the tarmac. The sunlight glinted against its wings, flickering gently across the floor. And in that quiet, her name Amara still lived. Even if no one else in that terminal believed she had a right to it. There are moments in life that do not announce themselves. They come quietly, like a draft in a still room, and by the time you feel them, they've already changed something. Amara felt it in her chest before she knew what it was, a tension low in her ribs, a warning in the air, like the stillness before a summer storm. She had just gathered the last shard of the broken mug into the curve of her hand, wrapping it in the soft sleeve of her hoodie as if tucking in a child. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from something older, deeper, an exhaustion that comes from holding yourself together too long. The guard across from her, the taller one with sandy eyebrows and a jaw that didn't move unless it had to, stepped forward again. Without asking, he reached for the bag she had tried to reclaim, tugging at the front pocket zipper with one quick motion. The sound of its EKKK felt too loud, too final. Out came her journal, its pages bent from travel. Her wrist wraps, still damp from yesterday's practice. A few protein bars she had packed in case she got hungry mid-flight, ordinary things. Harmless things. Still, he sifted through them like they might carry danger. And then from the bottom of the bag, he pulled out a small bottle, clear plastic. A worn label that read Recovery Mist Cooling Relief. He held it up between his fingers like it was a relic from a crime scene. "You're going to tell us what this is," he said. His voice wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't kind either. It was the kind of voice that didn't expect answers, only confirmation. Amara opened her mouth. "That's just for soreness," she said. Her voice cracked on the second syllable. But he had already turned toward his partner. The bottle was passed between them with exaggerated care. They didn't nod. They didn't smirk. But everything in their bodies said they didn't believe her. She looked around, her eyes scanning the space beyond the checkpoint. There was no help coming. No shift in the crowd. Only a growing circle of observers, people with their phones raised like bouquets of silence, watching, recording, not one stepping forward. Her phone buzzed. The sound pulled her back to herself. She reached into her pocket, hands still unsteady, and answered without checking the screen. She didn't need to. She knew the sound of that vibration, knew the weight of his timing. "Pumpkin," said the voice on the line, warm and low. "You sure you don't want me there?" She closed her eyes for a second, and the air felt different, like someone had cracked a window in a room too long shut. "No," she said, letting a small breath escape. "I need to do this alone. Just once. Trust me." There was a pause. She could almost picture him on the other end, standing near the kitchen counter. One hand braced on the wood, the other probably holding that mug he always used, the chipped one with the faded map of Texas. "All right," John Wick said finally. "But you call me the second you land. I will, I mean it. I know. Love you. Love you more." She hung up and slipped the phone back into her pocket. The guards were still talking among themselves, now calling over another agent with a badge clipped to his belt. She felt their eyes brush over her, evaluating, calculating. She wasn't Amara to them. She was a shape that didn't match the story they believed. A puzzle piece they had already decided must be forged. And something inside her, something that had long ago curled into the corners of her soul to stay quiet, began to shift. The guard with the busket reached for her wrist, pulling it behind her back with what he must have thought was controlled force. The second followed, securing the other arm. She gasped not from pain, but from the realization that it was actually happening. That her choice to explain, to stay calm, had not spared her from this part of the story. The circle of phones widened. People leaned in without stepping forward. The air felt thick with the presence of eyes, of screens, of judgment. She wasn't Amara anymore. She was a clip. A headline, a silhouette waiting to be captioned. And then, without warning, her body moved. It didn't ask for permission. It didn't need to. It remembered things she had learned in silence in long hours at the gym, in moments when pain had been measured not by how much she could take, but by how much she could bear without letting go. Her left foot swept under the guard closest to her, catching the back of his ankle. He stumbled, more surprised than hurt, and went down hard. The second guard lunged forward, but her shoulder twisted, redirecting his weight with the same rhythm she'd used 100 times before on the mat. He fell into the stack of plastic bins near the conveyor, arms flailing for balance. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman cried out. A child pointed. Someone dropped their phone. Amara didn't attack. She didn't shout. Her fists remained closed, not clenched, but ready. She was not fighting out of anger. She was fighting to exist. The third guard grabbed her arm, twisting it upward. She winced but pivoted, elbowing his side with enough force to break the hold. A fourth agent appeared from behind, arms around her waist, pinning her back. She kicked, once, twice. But the math was catching up to her. 4 against 1, 17 years old. A hoodie, a name, a bottle in a bag. She was never meant to win this part. Still, she fought, not wildly, not with desperation, with precision, with refusal, with the kind of control that said, without words, I am here, and I am not small. They pinned her at last. Her arms twisted behind her, her feet no longer touching the ground. She screamed once, not in fear, but in a sound closer to grief. And then it stopped. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. Her cheek pressed against the cold tile floor. Her backpack lay open, its contents spread like artifacts. A man's voice, calm and measured, cut through the noise. Enough, no one moved at first. But the tone of the voice wasn't a request. It was recognition of something deeper than rank, something older than control. The weight of it settled over the room like dust from a long-shut curtain falling open. And in that stillness, Amara closed her eyes, not in surrender, but in the fragile hope that someone had finally seen her. Really seen her, as more than a headline, as more than a name, as a daughter. Some silences carry weight, not because they are empty, but because they make room for truth to enter. The kind of silence that falls when someone walks into a room and does not need to announce themselves. The kind that hushes even the automatic doors and the loudspeaker overhead, as if the building itself knows to pay attention. Amara lay still, her breath caught between a sob and a gasp, her face pressed lightly to the cold tile floor, her cheek stung. Not from the pressure, but from something deeper, the quiet betrayal of being touched too roughly by strangers who hadn't asked her name, hadn't asked her side. Her legs had stopped kicking. Not because she had surrendered, but because there was no more space left to resist, not in this moment, not in this place. Her backpack, once zipped and neat, now gaped open nearby like a wound. The broken ceramic pieces of the mug peeked through a tear in the fabric, one small shard glinting faintly in the light like a tooth, like something that had bitten the floor and lost. A fourth officer had arrived somewhere in the blur of noise. His hands had found her waist, locked her still. Her heart pounded so hard that it echoed in her ears, louder than the scattered voices, louder than the whispering of curious onlookers. And then it came. A voice, not shouted, not forced, just spoken. That's enough, the room exhaled all at once. The grip on her arms loosened. The officer behind her hesitated. The weight pressing against her back drew back slightly, not out of mercy but uncertainty. People around them looked up, their phones lowering a few inches, their heads turning toward the direction of the voice. She lifted her head just enough to see over her shoulder, and there he was. John Wick didn't look like anyone important. He wore a simple gray jacket that didn't quite sit right at the shoulders. His jeans were worn at the knees. His shoes, the kind built for comfort rather than speed, were scuffed at the toe. He carried nothing in his hands, no badge, no briefcase, no proof of authority. Only stillness and eyes that scanned the scene without flinching. He took one step forward, then another, not fast, not slow. Just steady. He didn't rush to her side. He didn't raise his voice or demand to be heard. He simply stood in front of the officers and said, in that same measured tone, "Let her go." No one spoke, no one needed to. Something about the way he said it made it clear that this wasn't a suggestion. The officer who held her wrist let go first. The second, who had pinned her lower back, followed. One by one, they stepped away as if realizing too late that they had misread the moment, that they had stepped into a role they no longer understood. Amara rolled slightly onto her side, then pushed herself up with trembling arms. She sat back on her heels, one hand pressed to her chest as if to make sure it was still beating. Her eyes met John's for the first time since the morning began. He looked at her, not with worry, but with recognition. He didn't ask if she was okay. He knew she wasn't, and somehow that knowledge was more comforting than any question could have been. Then another voice entered the space, more rushed, more desperate. A man in a rumpled blazer appeared from a side hallway, his tie askew, a badge clipped hastily to his belt. His name tag read Graham Temple, Terminal Supervisor. "I'm sorry," he said, approaching with one hand half raised in apology, half in surrender. I mean we acted on an alert. It was protocol, a system flag. It wasn't personal." John didn't move. He didn't blink. "Your system doesn't know my daughter," he said softly. Graham opened his mouth, closed it again. John continued. "She showed you her ID, her name, her story, and you didn't believe her." His voice was still gentle, but it had an edge now, the kind that isn't made of anger, but of weariness. Like a man who has had to say this before, too many times. "You didn't doubt her because of what she lacked," John said, "but because of what you refused to see." The words floated in the still air, unchallenged. Graham's shoulders sagged. His eyes dropped to the floor, then to the open backpack, then to the girl now sitting with her knees folded against her chest. I see that now," Graham murmured. I'm deeply sorry." He stepped closer, then hesitated, as if the very air around John Wick had grown too dense to cross without permission. "We can reinstate the ticket," Graham said quickly. "She be upgraded. No further delay. I'll speak to the officers." To the staff. This shouldn't have happened. John didn't reply. He looked down at Amara instead. She hadn't spoken since he arrived. Her hands were now folded tightly in her lap. Her face was calm, but her lips were pressed into a thin line. Her eyes were wet, not from tears, but from the effort of holding them back. There was a shard of the broken mug beside her foot. She reached for it, slowly, and wrapped it again in the cloth of her sleeve. She looked up at John. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. He nodded once, the motion small but full of meaning. "I know." The supervisor spoke again, softer now. We can make this right." John turned to face him fully for the first time. "You can't unbreak a thing just because you see it differently now," he said. "That's not how repair works." Graham looked away again, his mouth opened, then closed. Whatever he might have said next was caught in his throat. John didn't speak further. He stepped over to Amara, offered his hand. She took it. Her fingers fit easily into his, even though her palm was shaking. He helped her to her feet. She didn't stand tall, but she stood, and that, for now, was enough. The terminal was quieter now. Some people still watched. Some turned away, embarrassed. A few tucked their phones into their pockets as if they had just realized what they had done. The light overhead flickered once, then steadied. John placed his hand gently on Amara's back. And together, without ceremony, they walked out of the circle of eyes and into a quieter part of the terminal. Her backpack swung loosely at her side, one strap broken, but she carried it, not because it was whole, but because it still belonged to her. And as they walked, she felt something shift, not the weight of what had happened, but the quiet knowledge that she had not been left alone in it, not this time. Not this story. Outside the glass wall, the sky was starting to change. The blue had deepened, just slightly, like the end of a summer afternoon, and in that light, soft as it was, her name still held. There's a kind of quiet that settles in after something breaks, a hum that lingers between people, not from silence exactly, but from the weight of having witnessed too much and not knowing where to put it. Amara stood in that space, not fully upright, but no longer on the ground. Her clothes were creased and pulled askew, her hoodie slipping off one shoulder. A red mark spread across her wrist where the guard had gripped her, a shadow already beginning to form beneath the skin. Her backpack still hung open at her side, one strap torn and dangling like an arm out of socket. The broken pieces of the mug, carefully wrapped in her sleeve, pressed gently against her palm. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence alone had changed the room. Graham Temple, the terminal supervisor, was still standing a few feet away, clutching a clipboard now, though no one had asked for reports or signatures. His mouth opened and closed in stammered starts, as if he were grasping for the right combination of words to smooth over the crack in the surface of the day. "I've already spoken with the gate agent," he said hurriedly. "We'll reinstate the ticket. Full upgrade, no further screening." John Wick remained still. His gaze did not shift toward Graham, it stayed with Amara as if anchoring her. "We'll also issue a formal apology," Graham continued, the word formal catching awkwardly on his tongue, as if even he knew it wasn't the right kind of apology. "We'll address this at the staff level. I'll speak to public relations. There's a process we can follow for cases like this." John said nothing. His hands remained at his sides, fingers lightly curled. He wasn't scowling, wasn't nodding, just watching, as if he knew that what needed to be fixed could not be fixed with statements or upgraded seats. Amara blinked slowly, her gaze drifting past her father's shoulder to the growing crowd. A circle had formed, not tight, not close, but steady. Some people stood back with their arms crossed, unsure whether to watch or walk away. Others still held their phones aloft, although the record light had long gone dark. A few had their hands tucked in front of them, as if holding something fragile that they didn't know how to carry. John finally spoke, but not to Graham. He turned to Amara, his voice so quiet it might have been mistaken for thought. "You stood your ground," he said. "That was all." But it reached her like a hand resting on her back, steadying not her body, but her sense of place. A murmur passed through the crowd, not loud, not disruptive, just movement, a ripple of awareness. An older woman near the edge of the group leaned toward her husband and spoke softly, though not so quietly that her words didn't carry. "That could have been our granddaughter," she said. Her husband nodded without speaking. A teenage boy in a hoodie, not unlike Amara's, was crouched near the edge of a bench, phone in hand. His thumbs moved quickly, typing beneath a video that had just finished uploading. A caption appeared across the top. "This is what dignity looks like under pressure." A few rows down, a man with thinning gray hair knelt beside a girl who looked about 10, her travel pillow still looped around her neck. He gestured gently toward Amara. "Do you see her?" he said. "That's what strength looks like." The girl stared, wide-eyed. She didn't nod, she just looked, as if trying to memorize something she didn't yet have words for. Back near the security lane, one of the officers who had handled Amara's bag now stood stiffly, eyes lowered. He wasn't speaking to anyone, but the crease in his brow, the slight tremor in the hand resting on his belt, those were apologies of their own kind. No one had called for a press release. No reporter had rushed to the scene, but something was shifting. And not because of the man who had come in quietly and said enough, but because the girl they had dismissed had not vanished into shame. She had stayed. She had stood, not loudly, not angrily, but wholly. And in that, something cracked open in the collective gaze of the room. John touched Amara's shoulder lightly. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. Not because she felt ready, but because she had nothing left to fear from walking forward. As they turned toward the gate, Graham stepped aside, his clipboard now held like a shield. "If there's anything else I can do," he began, but John had already passed. The crowd opened slightly, making room not for celebrity, but for dignity, not for fame, but for grace. They moved slowly, as if the air had thickened. And behind them, the eyes that had once judged or ignored now followed with something else. Regard? Outside, a single beam of light from the afternoon sun had broken through the glass roof, falling across the terminal floor like a path waiting to be taken, and Amara stepped into it. The hush inside the cabin was not silence, but something softer, a gentle thrum of air conditioning, the low creak of overhead bins being shut, the almost imperceptible murmur of passengers settling into their seats. It was a kind of quiet that asked nothing of anyone, and that, more than anything, was a mercy. Amara sat by the window, her knees tucked just slightly to the side, her eyes fixed on the soft blur of the tarmac beyond the thick glass. She didn't fidget. She didn't speak. In her lap rested a folded white towel hotel issue, slightly scratchy, too thin for comfort, but clean. It cradled the broken pieces of the mug the way one might hold something sacred. She held it not because she believed it could be repaired, but because letting go of it now would feel like letting go of her own name. John sat beside her. His posture was relaxed but attentive, the way people sit when they're prepared to move, but know the most important thing, at least for now, is to remain still. His hands rested on his thighs, open, not clenched. He didn't speak. He just watched her, letting the moment unfold without hurry. Outside, the sun had lowered in the sky, casting long shadows across the tarmac. A few clouds drifted high above, their edges painted with a soft pink that only late afternoon could create. There was no announcement yet, no call for takeoff, just that in-between space where nothing has quite begun and nothing has quite ended. Amara finally looked down. The towel in her lap felt warm now, not from heat but from being held. Her fingers traced the outline of the largest shard through the fabric. One edge had split clean down the curve of the cup, like a line drawn on a map, marking where the past gave way to the present. John reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. From it, he pulled out a handkerchief cotton, neatly folded, the corners slightly frayed. He always carried one, always the same one. Amara had teased him about it once, called it old man stuff. He had just smiled and said some things never go out of style, especially if they're useful. He opened the handkerchief slowly and reached for her hand. "Let me see," he said. She hesitated, then turned her palm upward. There were 3 small cuts, thin and red, one still with a bead of blood at the edge. Nothing deep, nothing dangerous. But they stung in a quiet way, like reminders of how much even small breaks can hurt when you're already bruised elsewhere. John didn't rush. He dabbed gently, his fingers steady and warm. He didn't flinch at the sight of her blood. He didn't speak into the silence. He just cleaned the wounds as if he were caring for something infinitely fragile. "You remind me of him," he said after a while. Amara glanced up. "Your dad?" he added. She swallowed, her voice a whisper. "The one before you?" He nodded. He was like that too. Didn't shout. Didn't ask for credit, just walked into fires to get people out. He didn't say it with reverence, just truth. Amara looked at the towel again. At the pieces she had carried all the way from the floor of the terminal to this small, humming plane. Her shoulders eased, only slightly, but it was enough. Her eyes brimmed, not suddenly, but gently, like a tide slowly rising over stones. "I thought I could do it on my own," she said. You almost did, John replied. She shook her head, a soft, tired motion. I wasn't strong. You were strong, he said. But strength doesn't mean doing it alone. She leaned toward him then, slow and unforced, her body turning into his shoulder the way someone leans when they're finally allowed to rest. He didn't stiffen. He simply adjusted so that his arm wrapped around her, steady and sure. She stayed like that for a while, not crying, not speaking, just letting her weight exist without apology. I'm sorry if I caused trouble, she whispered. John tilted his head slightly, enough that his words could find her without needing to be loud. You didn't cause trouble. You were in trouble, and you stayed true. She nodded into his jacket, a small movement that carried more feeling than words ever could. The engines began to hum beneath them, a distant vibration becoming something stronger, more insistent. The plane shifted slightly as it prepared to taxi. The lights above dimmed just a little. John's voice came again, low and even. Keep the pieces, he said. Sometimes broken things are the ones that remind us what really matters. She pulled back, just enough to see his face. I thought you might say that. He smiled, faintly. She did too. Not because everything was okay now. Not because the world had changed in an instant. But because, for the first time since the morning, she didn't feel like she had to hold it all up by herself. She looked out the window once more. The runway stretched wide ahead of them. Beyond it, the sky opened like a long road, waiting. In her lap, she kept the towel gently folded. Her hand found his, and she held on, not tightly, but fully. Outside, the last of the sun touched the wing of the plane, lighting it in gold. And the sky, for the first time that day, looked wide enough for someone like her to fly through. And maybe that's the quiet truth buried in this story. That strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands its ground quiet, steady, and unwilling to disappear. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone stood tall, not for attention, but for what was right? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this speak to you real, raw, and quietly powerful, be sure to subscribe to Covert Truths so you never miss the ones that matter most.